Chapter 11. Slavery, Violence, and Judgment. Do you believe a human should be owned by another human? Of course not. That's slavery. You are correct. That is slavery. But let me ask you this. If you own a slave and pay him nothing, he is a slave, correct? Yes, of course. But what if you paid him a penny a day? Is he still a slave? I never thought about that. I guess he is. Correct. Why are you telling me this? Because slavery takes many forms, including today, and not just the obvious slavery, but slave workers all over the world, even in developed countries. Slave workers? Yes. Everyone from people working for wages below that which they can live on, to people passively or actively trapped by the threat of deportation or violence. Where is this happening? That's the problem. It's not always obvious. It could be your neighbor or a poor family halfway around the world. The point is, people are taken advantage of and trapped either literally or subtly by slave wages and fear. What can people do to protect themselves against this? Workers around the world need to band together in groups or unions to protect themselves against poor and dangerous conditions and unfair, low, or even non-existent wages. Who would treat people like this? Sometimes large companies who have a great reputation but hide the horrible treatment of their workers. Why would they do that? Partially greed. Partially greed. You said greed twice. I am aware of that. It's because greed is such a big reason. Also, their willingness to judge others less worthy of a comfortable life than themselves. Do you see how judgment can lead to slavery or slave wages and slave conditions? Yes, I see. A historical example of this was in North America when Africans were kidnapped, sold, and enslaved there. That's really horrible. It is. Where else does slavery happen? All over the world, sometimes this happens to captive populations by their own corrupt governments. Sometimes the native populations of a land are not only conquered, but brutalized. Are there other types of slavery happening today? Sadly, yes. Trafficking of teenagers and children is widespread and— What? Yes, millions and millions of them. They are taken, lured, or coerced and used for forced labor, much of it in hazardous conditions and sex work. How can that be happening in this modern day? Simply, the value, dignity, and self-determination of children is a low priority for those in power around the world. If the world's biggest businesses and wealthiest people were directly losing money as a result of slavery, it would probably be stopped by tomorrow. But as it is, wealth and power are the highest priorities for those with the highest levels of wealth and power. I want to help. I want to stop this. Seek out groups who are trying to expose child traffickers and the corrupt governments who protect them. Support these groups. Sometimes all these poor victims of slavery and trafficking need is a place to run to. Remember, many are in a strange land and don't speak the local language and have no money, and their passports, if they ever had them, were taken away. Millions of children, slaves, trafficked for forced labor and sex. It almost sounds unbelievable. We must not think of it as unbelievable or too large of a problem for each of us to make an impact. If we think like that, nothing will ever change.